One of the drawbacks of using the inline data attribute is that we can't share test case data across multiple test methods or test classes. We've got this additional non-player character class here in our production code, and as with our player character, it's got a health property and also a take damage method. We've also got this non-player character should test class, and if I uncomment these lines, notice here that the test case data is the same as for our player character take damage test. So if we want to reuse the same set of test data, we can't do it with the inline data attribute. I'm just going to build this so that our new non-player character tests show up, and we can see these in Test Explorer here, and we can go and run these tests, and the tests pass. So let's see now how we can specify this set of test data only once and share the set of test data across multiple test methods. The first thing we're going to do is create a new class, and we're going to call this class internal health damage test data. I'm just going to add that and make this class public. I'm going to add a private field here, which is a list of object array. And for the list items, we're adding 4 new object arrays. And notice the values for these object arrays are the same as we've got in our inline data attributes. We can now expose this list of test data, so we can create a getter-only property called testData and return the list of test data. When we're using this method to share test data across multiple test methods, xunit.net can read this test data from either a property, a field, or as the return type of a method. In this example, we're just using property data. Because xunit.net requires an IEnumerable of object array, we can simplify this by simply using yield return. We can then comment out these other lines here, so we no longer need this intermediary list of object array. Now we've got our shared source of test case data, we need to go and configure our tests to make use of it. So we're going to go and remove these inline data attributes. We need to keep the theory attribute here to instruct xunit.net that this is a data-driven test. But this time, we're going to use the member data attribute. This member data attribute takes a number of arguments. The first one is a string representing the member name where we're going to get the test data from. So we'll specify this as a string, and if we come back to our test data class here, we're going to copy this and paste it into this string. We also need to specify the type where this member name exists. We can do this specifying the member type property here. And in this example, we're going to specify type of our internal health damage test data class that we just created. So let's specify that. So now we've wired up this data-driven test to look for the test data member in the internal health damage test data class. Let's build this, and if we come down to our non-player character tests, notice we've still got the same test cases, and we can run these tests, and the tests still pass. We can tidy up this member data attribute, so rather than specifying the member name as a string, we can instead use the name of operator, specify our class, and then the member name, test data. Now, if we were to go and rename this test data property, we'll get a compiler error rather than a runtime test error. Let's copy this member data attribute, and we'll head over to our player character tests, and once again replace all of these inline data attributes with the member data attribute. Once again, we'll make sure we build this and head to Test Explorer. And if this time we have a look at our player character tests and just scroll down, we've still got our take damage tests, and we'll go and run all of these player character tests. And if we scroll down, Once again, our data-driven take damage tests pass. So now we're sharing all of this test data among different test methods and test classes. If we want to go and add an additional scenario here, all we need to do is add a new line, and let's say we'll take damage 75 and expect a resultant health of 25. All we need to do now is build this again and head to Test Explorer. And notice now we've got an additional test scenario in our player character tests. And if we have a look at our non-player character tests, we've got this new test scenario appearing here as well, because we're sharing the same set of test data. Let's just go and run everything to make sure there's no errors. All our tests pass, and we can see our non-player character tests. We've got the 75 damage version, and the player character tests. We've also got the 75 damage version passing. We can use this member data approach to also get test data from an external source. So if we have a look in our GameEngine.tests project here, we've got this testdata.csv file, and we've got the same 4 test cases here. Let's go and create another class in our test project, and this time we're going to call the class External Health Damage Test Data. We'll just go and add that and make the class public. And I'm just going to paste in some code here. Once again, we've got this test data property, and this test data property is going to read the lines of test data from the test data CSV file. We're going to loop through each of the lines in the file, split them on the comma, and then pass the individual integer values on each line, and use LINQ to project those into an IEnumerable event. We're then casting this IEnumerable event to an array of objects. We need to go and add a couple of additional usings here, one for system.io and one for system.link. Let's build this to make sure there's no build errors, and the build succeeds. To make use of the external test data, we can come over to our member data tests from the previous demo and change the internal health damage test data references to external health damage test data references. Let's also do this in our player character tests. Once again, change the references, and we'll build this to make sure there's no build errors. So the build succeeds here, but if we go down to Test Explorer and we open up, for example, our non-player character tests, notice we've only got one test showing up and not the 4 tests from the CSV file. If we try and run this test, we'll get an error, and we can see in the failure message here that we've got this system.io file not found exception, and it's telling us it can't find the testdata.csv file. That's because we need to go and modify the properties of this test data CSV. So if we right click and choose properties, we need to change this copy to build output directory setting. I'm going to specify copy always here to make sure we always get the newest version copied. So we'll click OK. I'm also going to make sure I choose the rebuild solution option here to make sure that we get the new CSV file copied and all of the test cases in Test Explorer refreshed. So let's click Rebuild Solution, and this time we'll head back to Test Explorer, and this time notice that we get all 4 tests from the CSV file, and we get the same tests for our player character here. Let's just run all the tests to make sure there's no errors, and all the tests pass. So let's go and modify the CSV file now, and we'll add a new test case. So once again, we'll add the 75 damage scenario, we'll save the CSV file, and then we'll choose Rebuild Solution. If we head down to Test Explorer, we can see this new 75 damage scenario, and we can run these tests.